Metro. On WDET, I'm Tia Graham. Now, the relationship between sports and gambling is getting complicated. Professional athletes have been in a lot of trouble for sports betting ever since the Supreme Court legalized it across the nation. Last month, NBA player Terry Rozier, assistant coach Damon Jones, and Pistons legend Chauncey Billups were arrested in a wide-ranging federal investigation into illegal sports betting and rigged poker game schemes. Now, Billups is accused of playing a role in a gambling scheme, but not sports betting. But his potential role in a plot with ties to the mafia raised many eyebrows, including those of longtime sports journalist Jemele Hill. Hill is a contributing writer for The Atlantic and the host of Spolitics with iHeartMedia. She's a Detroit native and has been covering professional sports for years. Kerry Jr. II spoke to Hill about her thoughts on how betting is changing sports and how the allegations against Billups impact his legacy.
So what are your earliest memories of Chauncey Billups?
I grew up in Detroit, obviously. I worked for the Free Press in high school, and then I later returned in 1999 to cover Michigan State football and basketball. And the Pistons were, one of the best teams in the NBA, or were beginning to establish themselves as one of the best teams starting from when I got there. And so once I was done covering Michigan State, I would shift and help out on the coverage of Pistons basketball. So I got to know Chauncey in that fashion as being obviously a fantastic player, somebody who, and we've seen this throughout the history of Detroit sports, who became so meaningful for the city because he really planted roots in Detroit and he really embraced the city. And it was a two-way relationship. Detroiters loved Chauncey Billups. Chauncey Billups loved Detroiters. And I think a lot of his story really resonated with people in Detroit. He was, up until that point, considered largely a career journeyman, talented, tough, gritty. He embodied a lot of the characteristics that Detroiters really pride themselves on. So it wasn't surprising that there was always this very natural, easy, organic, and very fond relationship that developed between both Chauncey and the city. Fast forward years later, when I wound up working at ESPN, I was there when Chauncey was hired as an analyst for ESPN. So our paths crossed many, many times while I was at the network. And he was somebody I got to know a little bit and build a really good rapport with. And, somebody, we shared the commonality of Detroit. So, and we knew a lot of the same people. So he was definitely somebody that I looked upon very favorably.
So then what goes through your mind or your head when you find out the news that broke that Chauncey was arrested for allegedly participating in a poker scheme, and there were ties of this scheme to the mafia?
It was stunning. The stunning part isn't that Chauncey would gamble, because to be honest, there's a lot of players, professional athletes who gamble. So I didn't really think that was any kind of indictment or of his moral character. But I think as we learned more about the allegations, that is what made it more stunning, is that this was something that involved the mafia, not just the mafia, but the mafia, as in representing those 5 families that people have heard about for years. And, given what the scenario that was presented, I think a lot of people were really, really stunned that Chauncey, who is somebody who cares about his reputation, who is somebody where his character means something, it's just hard to believe that, his name would be remotely close to anything like this.
And what impact do you think this news, and obviously we have to still let everything play out here, what impact do you think this has on his reputation as a former Pistons player, as someone who has had a reputation that you've outlined across the league?
I think people are probably willing to give Chauncey the benefit of the doubt. Like, you use the word that is key here, and that is allegations. Like, we don't know what his role actually was. We know, obviously, what's been alleged. But I think he's built enough goodwill with a lot of people in a lot of different places and circles that people really want to see what his side of the story is and really want to listen to what that side is. It is, because I think that is an entirely separate conversation addressing how the relationship between professional gambling and professional sports, really all of sports, has changed. And changed in a way where you clearly see now that there are gambling sites that have partnered with professional leagues. There are gambling sites that are producing content, media content about sports. And this within, I think, a day or two of all of this coming out about Chauncey and other players, the NCAA announced that it was going to allow college athletes and staff to bet on professional games. And I think we're entering a very dangerous period when it comes to, these relationships. I mean, ESPN, the biggest sports network, they have their talent on air talking about picks and parlays, and that used to be completely frowned upon, and now it's a regular part of the sports culture and a normalization. Once the laws were changed to where sports betting is pretty much legal practically everywhere, and people have such access to it, I think we're headed for a real crisis when we think about what gambling will mean and what that relationship will be to the next generation of not just athletes, but also young people in general. And I think that's the part that we need to be worried about. There was already a gambling culture that existed in professional sports, but now with the normalization of gambling across culture, I think unfortunately, and we're seeing this already every year, there are going to be more and more gambling scandals involving professional and college players.
You mentioned this culture of gambling. Where does it come from? From the athletes you've maybe spoken to, do they talk about why it is so appealing to them and why it is, from what you're saying, it sounds like it's pretty common and rampant within professional sports specifically.
It's pretty pervasive. The athletes that we watch on a regular basis are highly competitive people. And, to use as an example, Michael Jordan's gambling exploits are legendary. And everybody knows he gambles on the golf course, that when he was playing professionally, he gambled with his teammates. And so given the fact you have players with a lot of money, they often have a lot of time on their hands, in between games and practices. And so it's just the highly competitive nature of athletes and the seduction of gambling, which can be a very toxic mix.
You're listening to The Metro on 1019 WDET. I'm Kerry Jr. II. My guest is longtime sports journalist Jemele Hill. We're discussing the impact sports betting is having on the players, the fans, and competition overall. Now, Jemele, I want to get into a separate matter that was also under federal investigation. According to ESPN, Terry Rozier, a Miami Heat player, was accused of participating in sports betting schemes, which include pulling himself from basketball games to benefit bettors' odds. It also included providing information about players, and that information would impact a player's performance. He would do that in exchange for monetary benefit. When the findings are revealed about something like this, what's your sort of initial response?
It is unfortunate that, um, it sort of have been normalized in the way that it has, because, my prediction about gambling is like, I think it's going to be very much like tobacco. It's going to be like the next tobacco, because when I hear, especially about stories about young people who are gambling now and their access to it and their relationship with it, which is a lot cozier than it is maybe from people from my generation, because I still came from a generation where you had to go to Las Vegas for pretty much all of my life if you wanted to bet on sports. And with it being available on an app and all that, and I'm not saying that everybody who gambles is going to become some kind of addict. It's not like that. Um, or that, I'm not going to throw a rock from a glass house and say that I've never gambled on sports. I have gambled on sports. It happens rarely, but I've done it. At the same time, I think in certain environments, it becomes much more dangerous than maybe perhaps in other environments. And one of the issues here, like you pointed to Terry Rozier, is it may not always be directly about them gambling on, or them sitting at a poker table. It could just be the trafficking of information. And, Damon Jones, for example, another player involved in this, he's accused of telling some gamblers about LeBron's injury status. And there is an uncontrollable variable to all of this. It's like, you don't have to necessarily be an addict or a gambler to profit off the institution of gambling. And, even they had a player, Jonte Porter,
Mhm.
who has been banned for life from the NBA because of suspicious betting activity related to some parlays involving his play, in which he sort of is taking a cut of the action, if you will. And
What do you think should be done?
I think as an immediate way to address this, I think the league is going to have to do something to limit these parlays, because that is creating a lot of what they're seeing in terms of players being more directly involved, or at least with the use of information. So I think something needs to be addressed with the parlays in order to help the leagues kind of curb this a little bit.
And so, why is that the line you think the league should draw when it comes to gambling?
Because of recent scandals that we have seen.
Oh.
And the Jonte Porter example I gave, that was a parlay situation.
Hmm. Hmm.
Locally there in Detroit, I mean, Malik Beasley
Yeah.
was under suspicion for suspicious gambling related to parlays. And so there's a decided pattern with the parlays that are there. And so I think that is going to have to be sort of the first lever that the league has to address.
How has it changed watching sports?
I've talked to many players about this, and you certainly can see it in fans' reaction and those who gamble. But the players will absolutely tell you that it's made fans more vicious,
Mm.
um, that it's made them more abusive at games. Players have talked about this publicly, that they hear people shouting about their parlays, that fans will go off and say, "Hey, or they'll just tell them, even trying to be lighthearted, but also serious. Like, hey, I need you to score at least 15 tonight because I got money riding on you. Like, they're hearing that so frequently
Mm.
from fans in the stands that is bothersome. They're getting threatened. So it's just created a more abusive culture around sports, where fans are feeling far more entitled and
Mm.
audacious in terms of what they say to players, beyond just normal heckling because you're on a team that's against my team. But they have a personal vested financial interest in how they perform. And because of that, it's making it a very nasty relationship between player and fan. So I think the consequences of this are really damaging. And as a fan, a lot of fans now are not necessarily fans of teams, they're fans of individual players. And some of that fandom is just strictly based off a player that's winning you money or not. And so it kind of corrupts the entire reason why sports is so inviting. And, it makes it not just more transactional. It brings a darkness to watching sports um, that I don't think is really conducive for the game.
Yeah. Sports is, I think, what we often think of as kind of one of the more honest shows on television. Viewers trust that there's real, authentic competition taking place. What impact is all of this? These allegations against Chauncey Terry Rozier, everyone you've named, the NCAA rule change that you've outlined. What impact does all of that have on the integrity of sports more broadly?
Well, to me, that's like the biggest thing that the NBA and even Major League Baseball have to worry about, and especially the NBA. People, especially uh, fans, are emotional, and often what you hear from fans is the NBA is rigged. And that's a common thing to say because, people get emotional. They don't like the outcomes, or, everybody is an officiating expert. And so if they see a certain officiating, they just feel like it's tying into some larger conspiracy. And this doesn't do anything to quell those claims. And even though I think the position that Adam Silver, the commissioner, tried to sort of take was that we should be in some ways pleased that this is coming to the surface, because that means that the guardrails that they have in place are working. Well, I would probably push back on the commissioner and say, well, it also means that there's an undiscovered problem. And then it means that the credibility of your league is really on the line, because if people are given the impression that there's information being traded in secret, and that there are players who are taking themselves in and out of games to satisfy gambling bets, then people are going to begin to sort of no disrespect, put the NBA and the professional leagues in the same category as professional wrestling. And that to me would violate the sanctity of the game. And so what's at stake here for any professional league as these gambling scandals rise to the surface is the credibility and the integrity and character of the league.
So you've outlined a number of concerns about sports betting, and it seems like it's only really growing from here. Is there any realistic chance of it slowing down?
As the old adage goes, we can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. The horse has left the barn. I, but I do think leagues can do a lot to be more proactive. I mean, certainly the NBA, for example, they have a rookie symposium every year, and when they bring the rookies in, they talk to them about these types of issues. I think they need to make sure that they are continuing that gambling education throughout the season, making them understand that even, especially when it comes to the sharing of information, because some of this is done innocently, where they may be talking to a friend and talking about how their calf hurts. And then next thing you know, that friend is looking to profit off that information without their knowledge. And so I think they're going to need to continue to have very honest and very deep conversations about how they can be being used for profit and not even know it. And so the educational arm is important. Also making sure as well that if they do have to limit parlay activity and work a little bit closer with gambling houses, then they have to do that just to protect the credibility of the product.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many different elements of this that we're speaking from. There's how the sport itself is impacted. There are the individuals who now have wider access to gambling opportunities. There is the like you said, interactions between fans and the athletes, and then there's the viewership experience on its own. All of these things are ever changing. So I just appreciate you for talking with me about this and taking the time out of your day to shed some light on what we're living through in the world of sports right now.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you having me.
That was Carrie Jr. II's conversation with Jemele Hill about sports betting's impact on the National Basketball League. Hill is a contributing writer with The Atlantic and host of Spolitics on iHeartMedia and a Detroiter at heart. Coming up, we'll dive into the nuances of Latino identity in Detroit and beyond. You all stay right there. This is The Metro.